Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Michaela Kerrison, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Warrant Officer Class 1 Virginia Morris. Today marks the 55th anniversary of the Battle of Bin Ba, one of Australia's most significant engagements in the Vietnam War. On the 6th of June 1969, two Australian armoured vehicles travelling north from the 1st Australian Task Force base at Nuit Dat were fired on from the village of Bin Ba. Rocket-propelled grenades damaged one vehicle. After an exchange of fire, the vehicles departed and reported the attack. Two South Vietnamese Regional Force platoons were sent to investigate, but were forced to withdraw after coming under heavy fire. After the district chief requested support, the Australian Task Force Ready Reaction Force was dispatched. An under-strength infantry company from D Company, 5th Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, a troop of armoured personnel carriers of B Squadron, 3rd Cavalry Regiment, and a troop of Centurion tanks from 1st Armoured Regiment. The infantry of D Company and the supporting Centurion tanks and armoured personnel carriers, together with overhead support from Royal Australian Air Force helicopter gunships, entered Bin Ba just after 11 a.m. They expected to be facing no more than two Viet Cong platoons. When the Australians came under heavy fire, the soldiers discovered they were facing a formidable force of regular North Vietnamese Army troops from 1 Battalion, 33 NVA Regiment. The Australians reached the centre of the village, clearing houses as they went, but the tanks sustained damage and casualties under the weight of enemy fire. The assault stalled, and the Australians withdrew to take stock. A second assault began that afternoon. As evening fell, the Australians withdrew and set up defensive positions outside the village. B Company, 5 RAR, which had arrived that afternoon, spent the night harboured at the edge of a nearby rubber plantation. Early the next morning, B Company 5 RAR encountered a company of North Vietnamese Army soldiers heading towards Bin Ba. A sharp exchange of fire resulted in their rapid withdrawal. D Company entered the village and, after encountering no enemy, left the rest of the clearing to the local Popular Force soldiers. Fighting flared up at the nearby hamlet of Duc Trung, and B Company 5 RAR, with APC, tank and gunship support, moved into the hamlet from the south. The Australians did not encounter the enemy, and seeking to avoid civilian casualties, they handed over to the Vietnamese Popular Force troops to clear the remainder of the hamlet. A further sweep of Bin Ba was conducted on the morning of the 8th of June, and members of the Australian Civil Affairs Unit entered the badly damaged village to assist in rehousing locals and organising reconstruction. The bulk of the reconstruction work was completed about a month later. During the battle, 1 Australian was killed and 10 wounded. 4 Centurion tanks had been damaged by enemy RPG fire, and the majority of the Australians wounded were tank commanders and crewmen. The tanks suffered losses, but undoubtedly saved many infantry lives. Over 100 enemy soldiers were killed, and an unknown number were wounded. Despite the South Vietnamese district chief's best efforts to clear civilians from Bin Ba before the battle, some remained in the village, either unable or unwilling to leave, and a small number were killed. Images of dead enemy soldiers in the village square were later used to support unfounded accusations of war crimes. The battle was a decisive victory for the Australians, and the regiments involved were later awarded with battle honours. The decisive engagement resulted in 33 NVA Regiment being forced out of Phuoc Tuy province and into their sanctuary refuges in neighbouring provinces. Today, we remember the Battle of Bin Ba. We pay our respects to the men commemorated here on the Roll of Honour and to the survivors who returned home. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Barry James. Barry James was born on the 7th of July 1948 in St George, Queensland, one of 10 children born to Leslie and Kathleen James. He grew up in Toowoomba, where he attended Hluxton State School. The family was dealt a blow when Leslie died in late November 1959, leaving Kathleen to raise the children. After attaining his Year 8 Merit Certificate at the end of 1962, Barry left school to enter the workforce. He initially worked at the Memorial Park Station at Glamorgan, a large botanical garden. He returned to Toowoomba a year later, likely due to the warning funds at the gardens, and was next employed at the Toowoomba Abattoir, where he remained for the next 2 years, before working at the Darling Downs Bacon Factory as a transport driver. Outside of work, James was a keen sportsman, enjoying rugby league and swimming. He began the process to join the Australian Regular Army in December 1967, his mother giving her consent as he was still underage. James enlisted in Brisbane on the 30th of January 1968. He was sent to the 1st Recruit Training Battalion at Kapooka for basic training, and then the Infantry Centre at Ingleburn to train as a rifleman. At the end of June, he was posted to the 6th Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, then based in Townsville. On arrival at the battalion, he joined 6th Platoon, Bravo Company. At this time, the battalion had already completed one tour in Vietnam and had been warned to prepare for a second. As the men were kept busy on exercises and furthering their military skills, James qualified as a machine gunner and took on that role in his section. James and the majority of the battalion boarded HMAS Sydney for the voyage to South Vietnam on the 8th of May 1969. Arriving at Vung Tau, they were trucked to Nui Dat, home of the 1st Australian Task Force. On the 30th of May, the battalion began its first reconnaissance in force, known as Operation Laverack, in the north of Phuoc Tuy Province. The operation's main objectives was to locate and destroy enemy main force units. However, there had been no significant sightings of enemy forces for some months, and the operations were expected to be relatively quiet. As A Company secured Fire Support Base Virginia, other companies were flown into their patrol areas. Contacts with enemy with main force units began almost immediately and continued over the next 5 days. The men of 6 RAR initiated many of these contacts from ambush positions. On the afternoon of the 5th of June, 6th Platoon was in one such position waiting for the enemy. Just before 2 p.m, enemy soldiers were sighted entering the ambush zone. 6th Platoon initiated the ambush against what turned out to be elements of the 33 NVA Regiment. James opened fire with his M60 machine gun, but the enemy, far from being overwhelmed, began counter-ambush drills, returning accurate fire, then withdrawing. During the return fire, James was shot in the head. A medical evacuation by helicopter, a dust-off, was immediately called to evacuate James and other wounded men to hospital for urgent treatment. James' head wound proved fatal and he died en route. His remains were returned to Australia and laid to rest on the 25th of June in the Toowoomba Gardens Cemetery. He was 20 years old. When his mother passed away in 1990, she was laid to rest with her son. The epitaph on their grave reads, "So dearly loved, so badly missed." James' name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, along with more than 500 others who died as a result of their service during the Vietnam War. His photograph is displayed today beside the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Barry James, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning we will remember them. Lest we forget.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the memorial's development project. Thank you. We wish you all a pleasant evening.